Kodiak stopped without warning, which meant something was already wrong. Harlan Briggs halted 3 steps behind the dog and said nothing. He'd learned that early. When Kodiak went still, you went still with him. You didn't ask questions. You didn't reach for anything. You just matched the dog's frequency and waited for the world to explain itself. The German Shepherd stood with his full weight forward, ears locked independent of each other, his nose working in short, controlled pulls at the cold air. His tactical vest was still on. Harlan never took it off in the backcountry. Old habit, or maybe something more. The vest was the last piece of what they'd both been before everything fell apart, and taking it off felt too much like letting that go completely. The Cascades stretched around them in every direction. Old growth, dense and gray in the morning mist, Douglas fir pushing 200 feet straight up before the canopy opened to an overcast sky. The elevation had been climbing for 2 hours. Harlan's left knee was informing him about it in the specific way it always did. Not pain exactly, more like a reminder. 3 surgeries, 2 operational, 1 otherwise. The kind of injury that came with paperwork and a handshake and a lot of words that meant goodbye without saying it directly. He let Kodiak's rhythm replace the thought. Watched the dog the way you watch water, reading small shifts before the big ones. Right now, both ears were forward. The shape in the fog didn't make sense at first. Too angular, too deliberate. He held his gaze soft and waited for it to resolve. And when it did, his breath slowed without him telling it to. 2 structures. Set back against the cliff face where the ridge bent inward, tucked under a natural overhang of basalt that made them invisible from below and from any trail marked on any map he'd ever carried. Timber construction, weathered dark but not sagging, not collapsing, standing. Things didn't end up in places like this by accident. Comment 1 if you'd follow the dog forward. Comment 0 if you'd turn back right now and drop your city and state below. We read every single one. Kodiak didn't move toward the structures directly. That was the first thing Harlan noticed. The dog angled wide, taking a route that curved north before closing in from the uphill side, where the cliff shielded the approach from sightlines below. Harlan matched him step for step without question. He'd stopped arguing with Kodiak's geometry 3 years ago. Around the same time, he'd stopped arguing with most things that had kept him alive longer than he deserved. The north approach brought them to a narrow ledge of exposed rock beneath the overhang. From here, the 2 buildings were close enough to read. Both timber frame, both tight at the joints. No daylight showing through the seams. The roof lines were intact. The wood was dark but not rotten. Maintained. Harlan scanned the perimeter the way he always did, automatically, without deciding to. Entry points, egress options, areas of dead ground. There was one reasonable approach, the one they'd just taken. Getting out quickly would be harder. Kodiak moved past him to the side of the nearest structure and pressed his nose against the base of the wall. He worked a specific section, slow and deliberate, and then sat. That was his trained signal. Not alarm, not aggression. Find. Harlan crouched beside him and ran his fingers along the timber until he felt it. A seam too straight to be weathering. He pressed along the edge and felt the give. Controlled, hinged. A panel. Hidden from the front face, only readable from this angle. He eased it open. Behind it, a narrow alcove, sheltered from weather on 3 sides. A shelf of fitted stone holding 2 wrapped canvas packages, a coil of rope still supple and dark with preservative, and a metal box with a simple latch. No rust on the latch. Someone had kept the moisture off it. Not abandoned, Harlan said. He didn't touch anything in the alcove. He stood, turned, and tried the main door of the building instead. It opened inward on leather hinges, quiet and easy. Inside, dust, cold mineral stone from the cliff against the back wall and something else underneath. Something dry and preserved, the smell of paper kept in the right conditions. A work surface along one wall, fitted with simple tools and organized supplies. A sleeping platform opposite, narrow and functional. A shelf above it holding 3 items. A compass, a folded section of topo map, and a logbook bound in oilcloth, the edges worn pale with use. Harlan crossed to the shelf. He turned the logbook over in his hands before opening it. Oilcloth well worn but intact. No label on the outside, no name, no title, nothing to identify who it belonged to. Kodiak entered behind him and took up a position near the door, not watching the outside. Watching Harlan. He opened the logbook. The first entry was dated. A little over 4 years back. The handwriting was precise in the way that came from training. Even spacing. Consistent pressure. The kind of control that didn't come from calligraphy classes. Someone with field discipline. Someone who'd learned to write clearly under conditions that made clarity difficult. Clear skies. Wind northwest 11 knots. Temp 38 Fahrenheit. Observed pair of hikers on East Drainage Trail 071. Appeared experienced. Continued without incident. Harlan frowned. He turned the page. Another entry 10 days later. Rain. Low visibility. Solo male. Late 20s. Attempting North Ridge approach. Route leads to unstable section above second switchback. Placed cairn marker at the fork redirecting toward alternate descent. Observed subject adjust course. Continued safely. Harlan read it again, then again. He turned another page. Mother and 2 children, moving fast, insufficient pace for elevation. Younger child showing signs of altitude fatigue at lower drainage. Left electrolyte packets at trail marker near rock overhang. Observed both children recover to stable condition. Group continued south. He set the logbook on the work surface and stood still for a moment. The window was a single horizontal cut in the timber, 6 inches tall, positioned to give a direct sight line down the full length of the valley below. From that window, someone could see every person who moved through this drainage, every wrong decision forming in real time, every hiker who didn't know what they were walking into, and then do something about it before anyone got hurt. Harlan picked up the logbook again and read faster. The entries ran across months, then past a full year. Season changes, weather, trail conditions, and running through all of it, the interventions. Quiet, invisible, never direct. Rope left at a crossing that looked manageable and wasn't. A water cache placed at a dry stretch during a stretch of August heat. Cairns repositioned to route people away from sections of trail that didn't show their danger until it was too late. No name attached to any of it. No acknowledgement that it had happened at all. Then he found an entry with no weather data, no trail observations. Just 5 words. Did not reach in time. And below it, solo male, entered upper ridge approach after dark. Cache placed at intercept point. Insufficient. Harlan closed his eyes. Box breathing. 4 counts in. Hold 4, 4 out. He did it once, controlled, before he opened his eyes and turned the page. The entries continued. More successes than failures. He decoded the margin symbols gradually. A circle meant redirected. A check mark meant assisted. A single line through the margin meant loss. He counted the lines over the full span of the logbook. 6. He'd carried worse math than that, and called it a good outcome. But he understood that wasn't how it felt to carry it. He turned toward the later entries. The handwriting was the same person, but the letters had begun to compress. The spacing between entries stretched longer. 2 weeks between some, nearly a month between 2 near the end. The weather data became shorter. The trail observations briefer. But the interventions kept coming. Alone now, continuing. 2 words in the space where a full entry had always been. Just the fact, stated and filed. Harlan set the logbook down on the surface and stood still. Kodiak made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a single exhale, the kind that meant pay attention. Harlan turned. The dog was watching the door, his body still, his ears independently tracking. not tensed for contact, something more like recognition. Harlan moved to the narrow window and angled himself to see without being visible. The ledge was empty. The fog had lifted enough to show the approach trail. Empty. The forest below had resumed its ambient sounds. Birds calling, which meant nothing large had moved through recently. If someone was out there, they were either very still or already gone. He turned back to the logbook and went to the final written pages. The handwriting was thinner now, the entries shorter, but the observations were still precise. Still working, still watching, still writing down what was seen and what was done about it. Even as the writing showed what it was costing the person who was doing it. And then, near the last pages, he found the entry that stopped him cold. It was undated, unlike the others. Male, mid-50s, military bearing, efficient movement pattern, no wasted motion, German Shepherd companion, tactical harness, retired working dog, moving north on the east ridge, avoided the south approach without any visible prompting, either prior terrain knowledge or strong instinctive route selection. No signs of distress. Continuing observation. Harlan read it 3 times. The logbook in his hands weighed something different now. He turned the page. One more entry. The same subject, same mail returned to East Ridge, same route. 3rd consecutive visit, steady. Left water cache at Upper Crossing, continued south. Dog in excellent condition. He sat down on the edge of the sleeping platform. The wood creaked under him. "They were watching me," he said. The words came out flat. He said them the way he said things in a debrief, not alarmed, just placing facts in sequence. Kodiak moved away from the door and came to him. He pressed his shoulder against Harlan's leg. Not the full-body lean he used during a bad flashback. That was grounding pressure, something physical to hold on to when the ground inside Harlan's mind stopped being flat. This was simpler. Contact. Still here. Harlan put a hand on the dog's neck. He read both entries again, and then he turned to the very last written page of the logbook. The handwriting was barely controlled. Not from emotion, he could read the difference. From physical deterioration. Cold exposure, maybe. Or something longer than cold. The letters still reached for the same precision they'd had at the beginning. They almost got there. If the mountain remembers, that's enough. That was all. The page after it was blank. He fanned through the remaining third of the logbook, empty. Whatever came after hadn't been written down. Harlan closed the logbook. He held it with both hands for a moment and looked at the shelf where it had been sitting. At the topo map folded beside it, at the compass with the worn case. He looked at the window with the sight line down the valley. He thought about the 6 lines through the margin. He thought about "did not reach in time," written in that precise hand that had never once lost its discipline. Just 4 words carrying a weight that no amount of discipline contained. He thought about the Argandab River Valley. A narrow road and a building that had been flagged as clear and wasn't. And a decision he'd made in less than 2 seconds that had turned out to be wrong in ways that couldn't be taken back. The honorable discharge. The apartment in Tacoma that felt like a waiting room for something he couldn't name. The city that had stopped making sense. Too much noise. Too many variables. Every face another thing to read. Every closed door another problem to solve. The way the mountains had been the only place that felt honest anymore, where risk was visible and consequence was immediate, and nothing pretended to be something it wasn't. He'd come up here 3 years ago to get away from everything he'd failed at. He hadn't expected to find someone else who'd done the same thing. Someone who'd taken the failure and the exile and the inability to go back and turned it into something. Something that hikers in their bright Gore-Tex and their hydration packs and their confident strides never knew existed. Something that had kept them from making the wrong turn in the dark above a drainage that didn't forgive. Harlan stood. He looked around the room one more time. the precision of it, the care, the complete absence of anything personal, no name, no photograph, nothing that said I was here and I mattered, just function. Just the work continued until it couldn't be continued anymore. If the mountain remembers, that's enough. He walked outside. The fog had broken almost completely now, and the valley below opened in green and gray, the light catching the upper canopy in long gold angles. He could see the east drainage trail from here, the same trail he'd walked 3 times now without knowing anyone was watching. 2 figures were moving along it below, a quarter-mile down, slow pace. One of them was pointing up toward the south approach. The other was studying the terrain. They were going to make a decision in the next few minutes about which way to go, and one of those ways had a section of loose shale above the second switchback that looked stable from the approach angle and wasn't. Harlan watched them for a moment. Then he moved. He took the approach trail down to the junction point at a controlled pace, careful with his footing, quiet. At the junction, he found the exact spot where a tired hiker would naturally stop and look up. A flat rock, a natural rest point. The view of the south approach visible and deceptively accessible from this angle. He pulled 2 rocks from the surrounding area and positioned them at the edge of the trail, angled to draw the eye east rather than south. Not a cairn, not anything official. Just a suggestion, the kind that only read as intentional if you were paying attention. He walked back up to the ledge. Below, the 2 hikers had reached the junction. They stopped at the rest point. One of them looked south at the approach, then down at the rocks, then east. They talked for a moment. Then they moved east. Harlan watched them until they disappeared around the ridgeline. He exhaled once. Kodiak pressed against his side, briefly, and then stepped back and sat, straight-backed, looking out at the valley. Working. They'll never know, Harlan said. The dog's ears moved forward once. Harlan went back inside the first building. He found the shelf, found the logbook. He went to the work surface and looked through the supplies until he found a short carpenter's pencil wedged between 2 folded tarps. He tested it against his palm. Still worked. He opened the logbook to the first blank page after the last entry. He wrote the date. Then, overcast clearing, wind west-southwest, light. Temp approximately 46 Fahrenheit. 2 hikers, east drainage trail, 1025. South approach assessed as hazard. Loose shale above second switchback. Marker placed at junction. Observed both subjects adjust route east. Lost from sight at 1042. Assessed safe continuation. HB. He looked at what he'd written. The handwriting was his own. Less controlled than the entries before it. Larger on the page, the letters of someone who hadn't been trained to write in the field. But it was legible, and it was honest, and it was there. He closed the logbook and placed it back on the shelf, exactly where it had been. He looked at Kodiak. The dog was standing in the doorway again, facing outward, watching the valley below. His posture was the one Harlan knew best, not alert to threat, not braced for contact, attentive. The posture that said he was working and intended to keep working. Yeah, Harlan said, me too. He picked up his pack and stepped outside. The afternoon light had shifted, softer now, the shadows longer across the cliff face. He stood at the edge of the ledge for a moment and looked at the 2 structures behind him. The oilcloth logbook on its shelf, the coiled rope in its alcove, the window with its permanent sight line down through the drainage. Nobody would know this place was here unless they were brought here. Nobody would know what the person who'd kept that logbook had done, or what it had cost them, or what they'd written on the last page when the writing had become difficult. The trail below would keep moving people through this valley, whether anyone was watching or not. But someone had been watching. For years, in silence, alone at the end, watching and working, and writing it all down not for recognition, but because the work required a record, even if the record was never found. And then Harlan had found it. He thought about that for a moment. About whether being found changed the meaning of it. He decided it didn't. The mountain had nothing to do with it. The meaning was in the doing. It had always been in the doing. He adjusted the straps on his pack. The automatic motion he'd made 10,000 times before, the weight settling across his shoulders in the familiar way. But something in the settling felt different from how it had felt this morning. He couldn't have explained the difference exactly. Just that this morning he'd been carrying weight. Right now he was carrying it somewhere. Kodiak fell into step beside him. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. The way he'd moved beside Harlan for 3 years, through every version of the same darkness, through the nights that didn't end right, and the mornings that started wrong and all the distance in between. They moved along the ledge, toward the approach trail, toward the descent, toward the valley below, and whatever came next. Harlan wasn't sure what that was yet. But for the first time in 3 years, he was moving toward something instead of away. That was a difference he could feel in his body before he could put a name to it. A loosening of something that had been held tight. For so long he'd stopped noticing the tension until it started to give. He looked down at Kodiak. The dog was already watching him. That steady, patient gaze that had been watching him since the beginning. Through the worst of it, through everything. "Good dog," Harlan said. Kodiak's tail moved once, slow and deliberate, not enthusiasm, agreement. They kept walking. Behind them, on a ledge in the Washington Cascades that didn't appear on any map, 2 weathered buildings sat quiet in the afternoon light. Inside the first one, on a shelf beside a compass and a folded topo map, a logbook sat with one new entry in different handwriting, less precise than all the entries that had come before it. But there, the mountain wouldn't remember. But the logbook would. And the 2 hikers making their way east along the valley trail below, moving safely, unknowing, talking about something else entirely. They were part of that record now, whether they'd ever know it or not. Type 1 if you believe doing the right thing matters most when no one will ever see it. Or type 0 if you think it only counts when someone's watching. Leave your city and state in the comments. We read every single one. If Harlan's story stayed with you, hit subscribe. There are more stories like this one, about ordinary people who kept going when they had every reason to stop, and the dogs who never left their side. Loyal canine stories. We'll see you on the next one.